Thanks for joining us today and welcome to this event. We will discuss the very important topic of juvenile executions or child executions for an hour from now. Sorry for the technical delay. We couldn't have all of the speakers yet with us. We hope that they will join us during the event. But let's start it. The use of the death penalty for crimes committed by people younger than 18 years old is prohibited under international human rights law. However, some countries still execute juvenile offenders. According to Amnesty International, between 1990 and 2019, at least 149 juvenile offenders have been executed in 10 countries. China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, South Sudan, the United States of America, and Yemen were among those countries. 9 in Pakistan, 7 in Saudi Arabia, and 99 in Iran between 1990 and 2019. According to Iran Human Rights Organization reports, since 2010 to the very day we are in now, at least 63 juveniles have been executed in Iran only. We have speakers with us today from 3 countries. We've invited from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. We have one at the moment with us, but before I introduce the speakers in this panel, I should say that we will have a Q&A session after their speech. At the first half of the event, each speaker will deliver a speech for 10 minutes. Then I will take questions. Please do not hesitate to write your questions in the message box. Even during the speaker's speech, I will note them and ask them later. Now, let's start with Iran. Director of Iran Human Rights, IHR, Mahmoud Amir Muqaddam is with us to talk about Iran, its laws and regulations regarding juveniles and the death penalty. And we hope that we will have other participants very soon with us. Mr. Amir Muqaddam, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Kambiz, and thank you to the other participants and anyone who is listening to us. So today we have had the General Assembly on the coalition for the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty, a coalition of more than 160 organizations, and this is, of course, a side event to the General Assembly. So as everybody in this coalition, and I think most people in the world, at least in this part of the world, believe that death penalty in general is a cruel punishment. So it's a punishment where the state, in the name of the law, murders someone for having committed a crime. So by no moral standards, murdering someone should be right. So that's the death penalty in general. But what makes execution of children and adolescent people under age of 18 even more cruel and even more wrong is that in most countries, I think in all countries of the world, children and people under age of 18 are prohibited from voting, from getting a driver's license in most countries, from getting a passport, from sitting in a jury. So because the law says that they are not able to make proper decisions and they can't be given that responsibility. But when it comes to executing them for a crime they have committed under age of 18, then they are mature enough. And I think that's the part which makes the juvenile executions even more inhumane. And as you know, there are several international laws that prohibit death penalty or death sentence for offenses committed under age of 18. the Convention on International Convention on the Right of the Child, and also there are several international conventions that most of the world countries have joined or ratified, but still these executions continue. As our moderator mentioned, in the last 30 years, 10 countries have executed juvenile offenders. And Iran is by large responsible for most of the executions. According to Amnesty's report, between 1990 and 2019, Iran alone was responsible for execution of twice as many juvenile offenders as all the other 9 countries together. And in the past 2 years, Iran has been the only country practicing death penalty for juvenile offenders. So I'm going to say a little bit about who these juveniles are. At the present moment, about 100, we don't have an exact number, but the estimate is more than 100 juvenile offenders are on the death row in the Islamic Republic of Iran. One of them is Ali Arjangi. If we can have the picture. Yeah, Ali Arjangi, like many other death row juvenile offenders, was sentenced to death for an alleged murder committed when he was 17 years old. And since, according to the Islamic Republic law, murder is sentenced by retribution, that is qisas, the family of the murder offender, the murder victim, they have to decide whether to go for death penalty or forgiveness or for blood money. In case of Ali, they have decided or they have put an amount of blood money that if Ali's family is not able to pay, Ali will be executed. So that amount is 1 billion tuman, which is around 240,000 US dollars. This is a very high amount. So Ali's family, they have, well, Ali has only mother, father is dead. The mother has amputated one of her legs because of diabetes. They have sold everything they had, and they have managed to collect 1/4 of this amount. So basically, they cannot save Ali because they are not rich enough, and Ali is in danger of being executed in the coming weeks, unless the international community does something with that. So, as you see, the children who are on the death row in Iran, and probably in the countries which practice death penalty for juveniles, they belong to the most marginalized parts of the society. So I'm not going to talk about the process by which these people are sentenced to death. For instance, we don't have due process. Most often, people are sentenced to death based on confessions that are extracted after torture or lengthy solitary confinements. And very often, they don't have access to lawyer in the original parts of, in the initial parts of the investigation. You know, in addition to all the issues that I mentioned with the lack of due process, I think the issue of juvenile offenders on the death row is very serious. And I will end by saying a little bit about how the trend has been in the last 40 years. I mean, in the 1980s, where juveniles could be executed by firing squads for political reasons without any trial. So the situation has changed, meaning that because of the international, since this issue has international importance, many or in the international community is more sensitive to execution of children, Iranian authorities cannot continue the way they did for 20 or 30 years ago. International pressure has led or has forced them to change some of the laws. For instance, according to current penal law, only murder cases or cases which are mentioned in Sharia are punishable by death for people who are under 18 years of age. And the law has also distinguished between children, so that children under age of 15 cannot be sentenced to death. That was not the case for like 10 years ago. We had people who were executed for an alleged crime they had committed at the age of 13 or even lower. So something has changed, but it's far from enough. So still, Iranian authorities execute in average 4 to 5 juvenile offenders every year, and as I said, some of them might not even be might even not have committed any crime. So I hope that we will talk about mechanisms by which we can change this practice, and I think we will come back to it. So I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amir Mouadda. Mrs. Doheny, please tell us about Saudi Arabia and the situation of juveniles there, the situation of juvenile executions at the moment and in the past few years. The floor is yours. Thank
you. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to participate. And sorry also from our side. Also, it's an international issue, so we are accused, I think, with our audience. As we can say that our countries are the countries that we are working and we are talking on in this stage are really facing so similar issues according to the death penalty, especially for the minors. Over the past years, Saudi first of the list of the countries in terms.
We've lost Dua Doheny for now, and we hope she has very soon. Let's continue with Sana Farouk, the head of litigation at JPP, Justice Project Pakistan. I welcome you, and would you please describe the situation of juvenile offenders and death penalty for them in Pakistani laws today and during the past few years or even decades? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity again. I hope that there won't be as many technical difficulties while I'm speaking. I'm also very eager to hear from everyone else. So in our domestic legislation, there is an absolute bar on sentencing a juvenile offender to death or executing that penalty against a juvenile offender. This has been the case since the year 2000 when the Juvenile Justice System Ordinance came into play. This did not have retrospective effect, so it was only about a year after that that we had a presidential notification that gave the JJSO retrospective effect. So any person, any juvenile offender sentenced to death before 2000 would automatically have their sentence converted from death to life imprisonment. There have been developments in the law since then. It took a very long time, but by 2018, we've now had the Juvenile Justice System Act, which really expands on the rights of minors. It also links the rights of minors to our Constitution in direct ways with Article 25 and Article, which is the right to equality, and then 35, which is the protection of family. It also creates a positive obligation, which did not exist before, for not just for authorities to investigate juvenility when they claimed, when they felt that it was appropriate, but also investigate juvenility when the plea was raised by an accused person. So we're hopeful that we will see more improvements as there's implementation of the JJSA. However, in practice, unfortunately, due to a multitude of structural barriers, we've seen a lot of juveniles have been executed even after the passage of the JJSO in the year 2000. So even since December 2014, we know for a fact that at least 6 juvenile offenders have been executed. So really, when the legislation is quite strong, and we have even seen, well, I wanted to give the example of a really important case that JP was able to litigate, which is the case of a juvenile offender, Mohammed Iqbal, who was released after 2 decades of being on death row, and was very clearly, since the proceedings that took place after the JJSO was passed in the year 2000, was very clearly marked as one of would get the benefit of that law, but it took decades for him to get that relief. Even in his case, we see a lot of the lead to juveniles being given that kind of benefit. So first of all, we know that there is very low birth registration in Pakistan. In fact, we've had, there's nearly 10 million children below the age of 5 years that are unregistered. The figure grows by nearly 3 million children every year. It was a concluding observation on the Convention on the Rights of the Child that only around 30% of children are registered at birth. And the areas in which this is a bigger problem are Balochistan and Fata. And this causes a big problem, as usually it's the police, or even once a juvenile offender has gone into prison, it's those authorities that are recording the age of the person that they have taken into their custody. And this is done through visual assessments. And in cases where it's possible that they did have documentation, but it hasn't made its way into the hands of the authorities, or documentation at all because of low birth registration, it's all based on a visual assessment. And at many times the police might just refuse to record it, even if a plea is raised by an accused person. We also know that during police custody, as in the case of our client Mohammed Iqbal, he was severely tortured for a very long time. And so the concept of, whether a mitigating circumstance could be made out of his juvenility was kind of thrown out the window when the goal of that torture was to get a false confession out of him. So we know that many juveniles who are more likely and more vulnerable to giving a false confession, to be extremely traumatized and afraid in those moments, they're not likely to get the benefit of legislation that's not being implemented. We also know that the rules for age determination have not been framed yet. So if the legislation is good, it's the important developments in those laws are not translating to differences in protocol and procedure on the ground. So a lot of people are not being given the benefit of these improvements, and in many cases, it's unfortunate because I think there has been a real commitment by the courts to international law locally. As judgment, there was wide acknowledgement of international law, and they quoted several instruments and the CRC, but unfortunately, that's not translated into new rules.
It seems we've lost connection with Mrs. Farrell. Okay, so today we have a lot of connection issues. So let's continue with Mr. Amir Muaddam. I just ask our technical experts to try to solve the problem with the connection of other guests. So, Mr. Amir Muaddam, I have a question for you. Unfortunately, we don't have many participants due to technical issues. They cannot see us. They are here, but they can. Some of them have problems seeing our video and hearing our voices. So we continue with you. I hope that our participants can see the recorded session. I have a question for you. The role of international community in the legislations, in if there is any improvement or there are improvements in many aspects of human rights, including juvenile offenders in Iran. There have been some changes in laws in the past decades. If I'm right, please correct me if not. And what was the role of international community to maybe put pressure on the Iranian authorities, or the role of civil society in Iran? Please describe these two roles for us. Two roles, yes.
Pointed at, I think that both international community and the civil society inside Iran have played a major role in the small changes that we see. I say small because Iran still continues execution of juveniles. On the other hand, what we see is that the political cost of execution of juvenile offenders is much higher than it used to be before. As I mentioned, in the 80s and even 90s, juveniles could be executed. There were no information about them. When Iranian newspapers announce executions, they don't even write the names or age of the people. And I think as the situation is in both Pakistan and Saudi, people or juveniles on the death row, they are among the most vulnerable groups, or from the most vulnerable groups of the society, the most marginalized. They don't have let's say rich parents, they don't have access to lawyers, they don't have a huge network which can do campaigning for them. So and the same is with people who are being executed now in Iran. Very often we hear about them once they have been executed, because they belong to those groups that are so marginalized. So I think that a combination of the civil society inside Iran, human rights defenders who raise these issues, making the international community not to close its eyes on the executions, especially of juvenile executions, they together have made Iranian authorities to make some changes. So that's the reason why they don't execute juveniles for drug trafficking anymore. Or that when they or the number of juveniles executed are maybe lower than they were like for 30 years ago, but still we have a long way. So I think that we need to put this on the agenda. Last 30 years, the only changes that have happened in a positive direction, they have been due to I would say a coordinated attempt by the civil society and human rights defenders inside the country and the international community. And this is what we need to do more. So that's the solution for. But I think what Ms. Sana said about it seems that some of the issues that we have are similar, like the victims of this policy. They are all vulnerable and belong to marginalized groups. But then the solutions might be different. For example, the issue of the age that many people are not even registered. I think in Iran, maybe we have the same issue in Baluchistan, but it's not probably as big. So it seems that we have some of the same problems, maybe different solutions. But I think, despite the technical issues that we have now, I think it's great to sit with the human rights defenders in Pakistan and Saudi and actually think about, our region is actually among the worst when it comes to this issue. How can we solve that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Amir Muqaddam. I hope that the technical issue with other guests is also solved by now.
Okay, I wish there's no interruptions with the connection now. I just try to have a quick summary. During the past 5 years, during the King Salman and his son region, we have Saudi Arabia recorded the highest number of executions from decades. According to ESOHR documentation, 12 minors at least had been executed since 2015. As you mentioned, in most of our countries, there is no transparency. We can't be sure about the numbers. These 12 cases is the cases that we did monitored and did documented it. And been an international opinion and so much criticism and so much from states, from the United Nations.
I think we've lost connection again. Okay, let's continue with Pakistan.
I'm sorry, I think I missed your question.
Yeah, now,
hear
okay. That's very good that we have you again with us. Please continue, because I think you were disconnected before.
Am I audible? Because then I can just continue. Okay, great. I think because I got cut off earlier and I don't remember exactly where I left off. But I did want to talk more about what we could potentially do in the future. I really agree with that a lot of our problems are quite similar and there will be different solutions that work best for our context. It's very interesting to learn that from other jurisdictions as well. Something that's very important for Pakistan for implementation of good legislation that we've developed over time is the we have to create our age determination rules, not just for the benefit of the prosecution, but also for the benefit of the defense, and really for our rules to lay out exactly what each party is able to do. We do this in line with international frameworks and what is advised under international law, so that we can have the implementation that with no stakeholder trainings and nobody really engaging with this legislation or international instruments. We can't expect a vulnerable juvenile offender to be able to get these benefits without framing those rules, without doing those stakeholder interventions and trainings. We have seen a lot of success in communications with the UN rapporteurs, with constantly raising these issues with them, using the GSP Plus mechanism and the UNCRC in achieving our results. This kind of international cooperation has been extremely important in protecting the rights of juvenile offenders in this jurisdiction. And we'd also like to see greater cooperation with organizations such as UNICEF, and how much they collaborate with us on the ground, or organizations that really visit these prisons often and have relationships with our clients there. And with renewed cooperation between them, we'll be able to protect more juveniles, because at this point we are seeing that we're not able to track each of these cases, and there are absolutely victims of torture, juvenile victims of torture that are slipping through the cracks, and they're never raising juvenility pleas, and there may be people being executed without ever actually any of these organizations even identifying them as the beneficiaries of our strategies of intervention. So these are the things that we should be focusing on as we move forward.
Mr. Amir Muqaddam, we've heard from Sana that in Pakistan, a defendant was tortured severely to confess against himself and then executed. Please describe what's the due process. What will happen in during interrogations in detention centers, because we have heard many stories from tortures or at least misbehavior to put pressure on some defendants to confess. What do you have for us?
Yes, as Sana said, also in Iran, torture to get confession is being used systematically. I don't think I have heard of a single death sentence case where they haven't been used torture. So I think this is something that we need to do something about, because, you know, according to the Iranian law, torture is not allowed to get confession, and I think it's the same with the laws in Pakistan. And so what is the problem here? Why do they still continue this practice? I think a big issue here is lack of accountability. Let's say, I mean, combination of the most vulnerable being the victims and lack of accountability allows people at the detention centers in the prisons to actually continue the same practice despite being against even the internal laws. So, for example, when it comes to Iran, I know that in some cases the defendant have actually told the judge that I was tortured, and the judges don't pay any attention to that. And you know, thanks to the social media, these news comes out, and head of the judiciary, who is today running for the president, doesn't pay any attention to that. So I think we are talking about, you know, one, the legal aspect. Of course, the laws must be changed. The other part is the practical aspect. And I think by bringing more accountability also from the international community side, we might make some positive changes. So the question to you was, what were the factors leading to changes in the law? You know, when the law changed, was it in 2000? What was the role of the civil society and the international community, or where did the process start?
Yeah, so I think it was a long time coming, and I think it was a real collaboration between the civil society working along with the government to make the prohibition on giving the death penalties to juveniles come about. I think while there was definitely a recognition of international law later on, as time went on, even post 2000, there has been more recognition of international law. Perhaps before then, there was a real need to maybe ground this development in the law in the Pakistani constitution. And while there may have been more hesitation to incorporate international law principles before, it's been done more explicitly now. So I think over time, it really has been increased involvement from civil society, from key government stakeholders who have been very passionate about protecting the rights of minors. And we see that today. We see a real interest from a lot of government stakeholders in improving prison conditions. But again, while all of this has been really seminal in getting the legislation passed, it's continued lobbying by civil society that has been ongoing ever since, that we hope will push implementation forward. Because without that, it's really been lacking. I mean, we have a huge child rights network in Pakistan as well that have been doing incredible work, and I think they have a lot to do with the Juvenile Justice System Act of 2018 being passed and the wider protections for minors therein.
Thank you so much.
So we continue with Mr. Amir Muqaddam until we have other guests with us. Mr. Amir Muqaddam, we have another question for you. We know that Iran has signed, if I'm right, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the convention clearly prohibits the execution of minors, execution of those who are under 18 years old. How Iranian authorities explain it, because they've already signed the convention, but they don't follow the clear articles in the convention.
Yes. So basically, the convention says that death penalty and life prison is not allowed or is banned for offenses committed at under 18 years of age. And there are also other conventions. ICCP says the same, you know. So Iranian government, they ratified CRC, Convention on the Right of the Child, in the 90s, but they put a condition saying that unless it is contrary to Sharia. So basically, that's the excuse they use. They say, according to Sharia, the age of criminal responsibility for a boy is 15, and for a girl is 9, and they continue. But you know, everybody knows that it's not about religion, because for most other cases, you know, basically everything else, Iranian authorities follow the international norms when it comes the age of maturity for juveniles. So they use 18 years of age for everything else, but when it comes to criminal justice, they go back to Sharia. So I think that again, it's about the political cost. Death penalty is not being used. I mean, the Iranian authorities, I think most authorities in the world, they don't use death penalty to fight the crime, because there is no evidence that death penalty actually is deterrent when it comes to crimes. But on the other hand, the main issue of using death penalty is to create fear in the society, to hold on to power. And I think that again, at least when it comes to Iran, the political cost is very important. I know that, you know, we are running over time again, but I really hope, I don't know, Mr. Moderator, if you have any plans to organize a new event with the same participants, because I think we have a lot in common when it comes to our challenges, and we have a lot we can learn from each other. And as you know, we also belong to the same South Asian coalition. I hope that we can continue this communication and maybe have you know, do more brainstorming, because I know that, for example, in Pakistan, the civil society, they are much more advanced, especially the lawyers. They have a strong impact on the development that we see. And although unfortunately the lawyers in Iran, they are being persecuted and put in prison, but I think together we can be a much stronger voice.
Very much. Yes, I was about to promise that we will have another session with the same participants, because it was also interesting for me to hear similar stories from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Iran. The countries in the region have a lot in common, and also human rights defenders can learn from each other's experiences. So we will have another meeting quite soon. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulties we faced today, and I wish to thank all of the participants. Mahmoud Amir Muqaddam, founder and director of Iran Human Rights, Stana Farrow, head of litigation at JPP, Justice Project Pakistan, Dua Duhaimi, advocacy associate with European Saudi Organization for Human Rights, and also World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. I hope we could see a day that no countries execute people, especially juveniles. I thank you also who comments here, sent us messages, and also, again, I will repeat that I promise you to have this kind of meetings in the future. I thank you.
Thank you so much for being such a nice moderator, and thank you, Sana. It was great to see you again, and hopefully we see each other in another meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.